What the hell is this? I'm gonna have to clean this up. I'm gonna have to clean this fucking mess up.
Please clap.
The Great War was the sick man of Europe's dying breath. The nearly 600-year-old empire would collapse in the huge slugfest that was the First World War. With its collapse would come more than a century of chaos and turmoil in the Middle East.
2013 Allahu Akbar! Allahu Akbar! Allahu Akbar!
800,000 Ottoman lives would be lost in the conflict. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to World War I Overgeneralized. By the turn of the 19th century, the Ottoman Empire was in a state of decline. It had been gangbanged by various European powers for the past century. It had lost territory to the Balkan powers and Italy in the last half-decade.
How embarrassing!
In response to the state of decline, the Young Turks, no, not that one, launched a coup in 1908. The regime change resulted in CUP, or the Committee of Union and Progress, coming to power, but I'm just gonna call it CUP from now on. CUP strived for political and economic modernization and was fervently supported by Germany. Germany provided economic investment such as the construction of the Baghdad Railway and military advisors such as General Otto Liman von Sanders. The Ottomans were opposed to the Triple Entente, especially Russia, because, you know. The Ottoman Minister of War and main leader of CUP, Enver Pasha, was pro-German and was 2 days after the war broke out, a secret alliance was concluded between the Ottomans and Germany. To further alienate the Ottomans from the Entente, Britain seized 2 ships under construction which were ordered by the Ottoman Navy. In response, the Germans offered the battlecruiser Goeben and the light cruiser Breslau to the Ottomans as replacements and to gain favor with them. The Ottomans accepted, and the British attempted to intercept and capture the Goeben and the Breslau, but they failed.
Mission failed! We'll get them next time!
And once the ships entered Ottoman ports, they could not provoke the Turks. The Turks claimed they had bought the ships and gave the German crew fezzes to wear to hopefully fool everyone. Then they closed the Dardanelles to fuck with Russia.
Excuse me? What the eh?
The Ottoman government still debated whether or not to enter the war. Enver Pasha hoped to secure entry on the side of the Central Powers. His pro-German faction used its influence to organize a raid on the Russians. On the 29th of October, the Ottoman Navy bombarded Odessa, Sevastopol, Feodosia, and Novorossiysk.
Now that's a lot of damage!
The Ottomans soon joined the Central Powers on the 31st of October. The anti-war faction tried to apologize to the Russian, but Enver, being Enver, stopped the apology from getting through and modified the apology so it blamed Russia for the attack, because that's how logic works. Needless to say, Russia retaliated against its alpha version of Pearl Harbor and declared war on the Ottoman Empire on the 1st of November, and the rest of the Entente followed suit. The Ottomans soon declared a holy war, or jihad, against the Entente, despite the fact that much of the Entente soldiers were also Muslim. The Russians immediately invaded the Ottoman Empire in the Bergman Offensive, but they were soon beat back. The ever-ambitious Enver Pasha took control of the Ottoman Third Army and tried to press the advantage, hoping to seize the Caucasus and its oil. However, it was winter, and in the mountains, and it was Russia. Sound familiar? And his troops were poorly equipped and clothed, and Enver was copying an envelopment tactic from Napoleon. Yes, that Napoleon from 100 years before. The following Battle of Sarikamish was a colossal failure for the Third Army. Before the battle, the Third Army numbered 118,000 men, and after the battle, only 12,500 remained. Most of the deaths were due to the freezing weather and a typhus epidemic, but Enver, being Enver, did not want to take blame for this blunder, so instead he did what everyone else would do: blame the Jews! Wait, never mind. The Armenians.
Boy, I really hope somebody got fired for that blunder.
The Armenians were blamed for Ottoman failures in the field, and were subsequently punished for their alleged conspiring with the enemy. Through the entire war and beyond, the Armenian population of Anatolia was forced out, either into exile or at graves. Turkish authorities practiced mass deportations of Armenians to the Syrian desert where they were left to die. Their population was diminished significantly. Their property was seized by the government. Deported Armenians were subjected to all kinds of crime, including rape, robbery, and murder. Many were enslaved and forced to work on Ottoman military projects. Armenians were rounded up and forced into death marches to concentration camps where many women would be sold to Muslim men and the rest were left to die or be worked to death. Victims were also subjected to human experimentation, which is seen as a precursor to Nazi human experiments during the Holocaust. In fact, Hitler himself said, "Who, after all, speaks today of the annihilation of the Armenians?" This shows how much history has been hidden or denied. The Turks continue to deny that this happened, but the Armenian genocide did happen. Not only were the Armenians targeted, but so were the Greeks and Assyrians living in the empire. It is estimated that around 1.5 million people were killed in the genocide.
私に反応しないなんて、お兄さんのおちんちんを使い物にならないですね。
はいはい、そう。何？今、おちんちんとか言わなかった？
言いました。何かおかしいですか？おちんちん大好きですけど。
大好き？はい。
私と同じくらいの年の女の子はみんなおちんちん大好きです。
バカな。
きっと妹さんだっておちんちん大好きですよ。
そんなわけない。
Later. In 1915, the Ottomans retreated from the Caucasus, but they tried to advance elsewhere, namely in Egypt, to capture the Suez Canal. It was a major prize, as seizing it would effectively neuter British troop and resource movements. They crossed the Sinai Desert, but their approach was well known. The Ottoman forces failed to consider the existence of reconnaissance aircraft. The Turks were slaughtered when they got to the canal. It was not just the Ottomans who displayed incompetence, the British as well. After the Ottoman Empire joined the war, the Dardanelles were closed to Entente traffic. Russia was subsequently isolated from the rest of the Allies, who were unable to ship equipment to the Russians. The British wanted to break through the Dardanelles and reconnect with Russia, and in the process knock the Ottomans out of the war. The Russians, with British equipment, would then destroy the Central Powers in conjunction with Balkan powers, being encouraged to join the Allies because the Ottomans collapsed. However, this did not happen. British First Lord of the Admiralty, Winston Churchill, yes, that Winston Churchill, planned to use the British Navy to force the Dardanelles and reach Constantinople. The operation began on the 18th of March, 1915. The Allied fleets enjoyed some relative success destroying shore batteries, but the Ottomans had also mined the straits. Several ships, including the battleship Irresistible and Bouvet, were sunk by mines. The Allies abandoned the gambit soon after. Instead, new plans were drawn up for a land invasion. In under a month, the Entente had scratched together a force of nearly 500,000 men. Much of it were Australian and New Zealand soldiers. ANZAC, or the Australian and New Zealand Army Corps, was used in Gallipoli. The Allies landed on the 25th of April 1915 at Cape Helles and the later named Anzac Cove after Anzac itself. The Ottoman defenses were well prepared against the Entente, as they had been anticipating it since the place was bombed by a bunch of ships. Allied forces advanced a little, but they were soon pushed back to their starting positions. The terrain favored the Ottomans, as the Ottomans had the high ground.
It's over, Anakin! I have the high ground! Everything above your neck's gonna be a fine red mist! Don't try it!
Whenever the Allies tried to attack, they were mowed down by machine gun fire. The situation soon devolved into trench warfare. For the next 8 months, the situation resembled that of the Western Front, albeit with higher temperatures and much more diseases and Australians. Ironically, the battle that was supposed to end the deadlock of trench warfare instead became one of the most iconic examples of it. The only successful part of Gallipoli was the retreat, which was ordered in December 1915, which had more planning than the battle itself. All in all, 300,000 Entente and 250,000 Ottoman casualties resulted from the battle. Now, the British were not entirely idiotic.
Doing precisely what we've done 18 times before is exactly the last thing they'll expect us to do this time.
The British had better success in Mesopotamia, where they were advancing along the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. They aimed towards Baghdad, but they pushed too far and were forced to retreat a little. The Ottomans pursued and surrounded a British garrison in Kut al-Amara. What followed was a nearly 6-month siege where many of the British and Indian defenders starved to death. Relief expeditions by the British were repelled. There was even a bribe of £2 million to stop the siege, but the Ottomans refused. The British surrendered in April, and 13,000 were made prisoner, many of whom would later die on the forced march to Aleppo. What is Aleppo? The siege of Kut, combined with Gallipoli, were extremely humiliating for the British. Almost all British commanders involved were sacked. The rest of 1916 was spent recuperating from the loss and planning for the next offensive. In the Caucasus, however, the Ottomans were getting their asses handed to them by the Russians, who had captured Erzurum in 1915 and Trabzon in 1916. The Russians went ham on what remained of the Ottoman Third and Second Army. They even threatened to break through completely and enter Mesopotamia from the north to assist the British and advanced west into Anatolia, but the Russian Revolution hampered future operations. Meanwhile, in Palestine, the Ottomans tried to raid the Suez Canal yet again, but they were pushed back yet again by the British. The British were assisted by the Arab Revolt. Speaking of which, the Arab Revolt was, well, a revolt by the Arabs against the Ottoman Empire. Arab nationalism had been increasing alongside everyone else's nationalistic sentiment. The flames of revolution were stoked by the British, who hoped to use the Arabs to their advantage in the war. The British promised the Arabs an independent state after the war had ended. They sent gold and men such as T.E. Lawrence, later Lawrence of Arabia, to the Arabs to assist them. The revolt officially began on the 10th of June 1916 in Mecca. The revolt would soon spread throughout the Hejaz region, and it would work in conjunction with the British. After the war, the British would surely reward the Arabs for their work, right? Right?
Wrong.
A month before the Arab Revolt started, the British and French had signed an agreement to divide up the Middle East after the war had been won. Named after the two diplomats who signed it, the Sykes-Picot Agreement states that after the Ottomans were defeated, Syria and Lebanon would be ceded to France, while Iraq and Palestine would go to Britain. This went against what the British had promised to the Arabs, but a bunch of angry Arabs aren't anything to be afraid of, right? In addition, the borders the British and French drew were completely arbitrary and did not take into account the various religions and ethnicities present in the region, but as long as the Europeans remained in control, nothing could possibly go wrong. Or could it? After being rocked by two revolutions, Russia's new Bolshevik government soon sued for peace with the Central Powers, and despite almost always losing to the Russians, the Ottomans were allowed to take land from the former Russian Empire. The Ottomans took back territory lost in the last Russo-Turkish War, and the Caucasian states of Armenia, Georgia, and Azerbaijan became quote-unquote independent. However, they quickly fell under the influence of the Central Powers.
Later.
After the armistice with Russia, you'd think the Ottomans would use the freed up troops to combat the British, but no. Instead, good old Enver Pasha created the Army of Islam to invade the Caucasus because of course the Armenians didn't get beaten up enough. The Ottomans invaded the recently freed Caucasus states and established occupation all over them. To be fair, the Caucasus were of strategic value because of their oil, but the British were of larger priority, to be honest. In fact, the British sent a force to protect the Baku oil fields from falling to the Ottomans under General Lionel Dunsterville, comprising of 350 men. But 350 men against an army of 20,000 Turks could not protect that sweet, sweet oil. If only America knew about it, then they would help them.
America! Fuck yeah!
Appear that there's any kind of an effort up there yet. Now remember, oh my God.
My God.
That looks like a second plane.
Enver Pasha dreamed of a united pan-Turkish empire and tried to use the army of Islam to achieve that dream, but the Ottoman Empire capitulated before he could achieve that dream. Speaking of which, the British had broken through in Palestine and Mesopotamia. In 1917, the British captured Jerusalem and Baghdad. Haha, get it? The British pressed on in 1918, entering Syria by October and capturing Damascus on the 1st and Aleppo on the 25th
And what is Aleppo?
in the Merdigo offensive. The Hejaz Railway was finally occupied as well. The soldiers in the region were almost entirely cut off because of this. To make matters worse, Bulgaria had signed an armistice on the 30th of September, and the Turks were cut off from Germany, and the Allied forces in Macedonia now had an open road to Constantinople. As stated before, the Ottomans did not send any troops from the Caucasus. The fate of the empire was sealed. With no hope of victory, the Ottomans signed an armistice with the Entente at Mudros on the 30th of October, 1918. The Treaty of Sèvres was signed on the 10th of August 1920. The Ottomans were partitioned between Britain, France, Armenia, and Greece. Britain took Iraq and Palestine, France took Syria and Lebanon, and Greece took eastern Thrace and Smyrna, while Armenia took eastern Anatolia. The Kingdom of Hejaz was granted independence. In addition, an Italian sphere of influence was established in southern Anatolia, whilst French influence extended from Syria into southeastern Anatolia. The Bosphorus was declared open to all nations. Kurdistan was supposed to have a referendum about independence. The Ottoman army was restricted to 50,700 men. Reparations were included, but were soon cancelled as the Ottomans could never pay them back all because... The Turkish War of Independence prevented much of the Treaty of Sèvres from being implemented. Greece's gains were reversed, Italy and France lost their spheres of influence, and the Ottoman Empire was officially abolished. Now you may have noticed that the Allies did not follow through with their promises to the Arabs. Instead, they followed through with the Sykes-Picot Agreement. But the Arabs were quite irrelevant, right? They would never hold a grudge against us that long because of some betrayal 100 years ago, right? The Middle East would then be very stable forever. Nope. Couldn't keep a straight face.
Demonetized.